He promised his dying best friend he'd marry the man's widow. But Sarah Coleman had been hiding in the wilderness for 3 years, and she aimed a rifle straight at his chest the moment he said her dead husband's name. 3 years earlier. Gettysburg Battlefield, July 1863. Blood soaked through Crow Morrison's shirt as he cradled his dying friend among the fallen soldiers. Michael Coleman's breathing came in sharp, broken gasps, his Union uniform torn by Confederate bullets. Around them, cannon fire shook the earth, but Michael's grip on Crow's arm was stronger than death itself. "James," Michael whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant screams. "Promise me something." Crow pressed his hand against the wound in Michael's chest, trying to stop the bleeding that wouldn't stop. "Save your strength. The medics are coming." "No." Michael's eyes, once bright with dreams of home, were growing dim. "Listen to me. Hi, Sarah." He coughed, blood foaming at his lips. "She's alone now. Her father gambles away everything we had. When word reaches home that I'm dead." "Michael, so promise me." The words came with surprising strength. Michael pulled a bundle of worn letters from his breast pocket, pressing them into Crow's bloodied hands. "These are hers. Every week for 3 years she wrote to me. Read them. You'll understand." Crow looked down at the letters, tied with a blue ribbon, stained now with his friend's blood. The top envelope was addressed in delicate script. "To my beloved husband, Michael Coleman." "She'll have no protection," Michael continued, his voice growing weaker. "No one who truly cares. The vultures will circle the moment they hear I'm gone." His grip tightened desperately. "You're the only man I trust to love her like she deserves." "Michael, you can't ask me to." "Your husband made me swear," Michael interrupted, his eyes locking onto Crow's with fierce determination. "If he fell, I'd marry you." "Those are the exact words. Tell her exactly that. She'll understand it came from me." Thunder rolled across the battlefield as another volley of artillery shook the ground. Michael's hand found his pocket watch, the one Sarah had given him on their wedding day. With trembling fingers, he pressed it into Crow's palm alongside the letters. "We were childhood sweethearts," Michael gasped, a smile ghosting across his pale lips. "Dreamed of growing old together, having children, building something lasting. 1 year of marriage, then this damn war took everything." Tears mixed with blood on his cheeks. "She writes that she still sets my place at dinner. Still wears her wedding dress to church, hoping I'll come home." Crow felt his own eyes burning. "She loves you, Michael." "How can I?" "Because you love me too," Michael whispered. "As a brother. And because you understand what it means to keep your word." His breathing grew more labored. "She deserves more than just survival, James. She deserves happiness. Promise me you'll find her. Promise me you'll marry her. Promise me you'll give her the life I never could." The sounds of battle seemed to fade as Crow looked down at his dying friend. Michael's face was peaceful now, as if speaking these words had lifted a terrible weight from his soul. In his mind, Crow could see a woman he'd never met, waiting by a window, watching for a husband who would never return. "I promise," Crow said finally, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "I'll find Sarah Coleman. I'll deliver your message exactly as you said it. And if she'll have me, I'll marry her." Relief washed over Michael's features. "Thank you," he breathed. "You're saving her life, James. And maybe saving yours too." Michael's eyes drifted to the photograph tucked inside his watch case. A beautiful young woman with soft features and auburn hair, smiling at the camera with pure love in her eyes. "Tell her," he whispered, "that my last thought was of our first dance. Tell her I never stopped believing we'd dance again." His hand went limp. The pocket watch ticked steadily in Crow's palm, counting the seconds of a promise that would change 2 lives forever. Present day. Colorado Territory, 1866. 3 years of searching had led Crow to this isolated valley, where smoke rose from a distant cabin. His horse snorted nervously as they approached through the tall grass. The woman on the porch stood like a sentinel, rifle trained on his chest, auburn hair catching the afternoon sun. "That's close enough, stranger," she called out, her voice steady as stone. "State your business or ride on." Crow raised his hands slowly, never taking his eyes from hers. Even from this distance, even with the hard lines that grief had carved around her eyes, she was exactly as beautiful as Michael's photograph had promised. "Mrs. Coleman," he said carefully, "I was a friend of your husband's. I have something that belongs to you." Sarah's rifle never wavered, but something flickered in her gray eyes. Was it fear? After 3 years of hiding from the world, she wasn't sure she could tell the difference anymore. "Every man who rides up here claims to know my Michael," Sarah said, her voice sharp as winter wind. "What makes you different from the rest?" Crow slowly reached into his vest pocket, withdrawing Michael's silver watch. Even from 30 yards away, Sarah recognized it immediately. Her rifle trembled slightly, but she didn't lower it. "He gave me this before he died at Gettysburg," Crow said gently. "Asked me to return it to his devoted wife." Those were his exact words. Sarah's breath caught. Nobody else knew Michael called her that. It was written in every letter, signed in every note. "Your devoted wife, Sarah." Her rifle lowered just an inch. "You could have taken that from his body," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. "Doesn't prove anything." Crow nodded toward her cabin. "He told me you still set his place at dinner. That you wear your wedding dress to church every Sunday, hoping he'll come home." Sarah's face went white. "He said your father lost the farm to gambling debts, and that you grew the finest roses he'd ever seen in your mother's garden behind the house." The rifle slipped from Sarah's suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering onto the wooden porch. These weren't things a grave robber would know. These were intimate details, shared only between a husband and wife in their most private moments. "Michael's really gone?" she whispered, though she'd known it for 3 years. Somehow, hearing it from someone who'd been there made it brutally real. "He died in my arms," Crow said softly. "His last words were about you." Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank onto the porch steps, her hands covering her face. For 3 years she'd lived in this remote valley, hiding from bill collectors and men who saw a widow as easy prey. She'd grown her own food, trapped her own meat, and slowly watched her heart turn to stone. But now, faced with proof of her worst fears, the stone cracked. "What did he say?" she asked through her tears. Crow dismounted slowly, approaching like he would a wounded animal. When he reached the bottom of her porch steps, he stopped, giving her space to breathe. He said, "Your husband made me swear, if he fell, I'd marry you." Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "That's a lie. Michael would never. He loved me. He wouldn't just give me away like property." "No," Crow agreed quietly. "He wouldn't. That's why he chose me." From his saddlebags, Crow withdrew the bundle of letters, still tied with Sarah's blue ribbon. Her handwriting was faded now, but still legible on every envelope. Sarah stared at them as if seeing ghosts. "He read these every night," Crow said. "Even when we were under fire, even when we were marching 20 miles a day. He'd find a quiet spot and read about your roses, about the new curtains you'd sewn, about how you were learning to manage the farm accounts." Sarah reached out with shaking hands, taking the letters. They smelled like gunpowder and Michael's familiar scent of soap and leather. "He kept them all?" "Every single one. When the fever took hold that last night, he made me promise to bring them home to you." Crow sat down on the bottom step, careful to keep distance between them. "He also made me promise something else. To marry me," Sarah said bitterly. "Like I'm some burden to be passed from hand to hand." "To love you," Crow corrected. "The way you deserve to be loved." Old Pete emerged from his nearby cabin, drawn by the sound of voices. The elderly hermit had been Sarah's only neighbor and friend for 3 years, bringing her supplies from town and keeping her secrets. He studied Crow with shrewd eyes. "This the man you've been watching for?" Pete asked Sarah. You've been watching for someone? Crow asked, surprised. Sarah wiped her eyes, embarrassed. Old Pete said a man had been asking questions in town. About Michael Coleman's widow. I hoped. She trailed off. You hoped Michael had sent someone to find you, Crow finished gently. Foolish, I know. Dead men don't send messengers. Don't they? Crow asked softly. He opened Michael's watch, revealing the tiny photograph inside. Sarah's wedding portrait, young and radiant and full of dreams. He spent 3 years planning this, Sarah. Not as a burden, but as a gift. He wanted you to have more than just survival. Sarah stared at her own young face, remembering the girl who'd believed in forever. I can't, she whispered. I can't just stop loving him and love someone else. He's not asking you to stop loving him, Crow said, echoing Michael's own words. He's asking you to start living again. Thunder rumbled in the distance as dark clouds gathered over the mountains. Sarah looked up at the sky, then at the stranger who carried her husband's dying wish. There's a storm coming, she said finally. You can shelter in the barn. But come morning, I want you gone. I won't dishonor Michael's memory by marrying a stranger just because he asked you to. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Crow nodded and led his horse toward the barn. But he didn't ride away in the morning. Instead, he built a small camp by the creek, close enough to watch over Sarah, far enough to respect her wishes. The courtship of Sarah Coleman had begun. 2 weeks passed in stubborn silence. Sarah watched from her kitchen window as the stranger, James Morrison, he'd finally told her his name, went about the quiet business of making himself useful without being asked. He repaired her sagging fence posts, cleared fallen trees from her path to the creek, and drove off a pack of wolves that had been stalking her chickens. He never approached the house. Never presumed. Just worked steadily in her line of sight, as if his mere presence could hold the world's dangers at bay. That man's got patience like a saint, Old Pete observed one afternoon, sharing coffee at Sarah's kitchen table. Through the window, they watched Crow splitting firewood with methodical precision. Most fellows would have given up by now. Good, Sarah replied curtly, but her eyes lingered on Crow's careful movements. There was something reassuring about his quiet competence, the way he went about tasks as if he had all the time in the world. Maybe he'll finally realize I meant what I said and move on. Pete chuckled. Sarah, girl, that man's not going anywhere. Can't you see it in the way he works? He's not trying to win you over. He's trying to keep you safe. I don't need keeping safe, Sarah said, but even as the words left her mouth, she remembered the 3 men from town who'd shown up last week. They'd claimed to be debt collectors, but their eyes had lingered too long on her isolated cabin, her lack of male protection. They'd ridden away quickly enough when they spotted Crow watching from the tree line, hand resting casually on his pistol. That night, a fierce thunderstorm rolled through the valley. Sarah woke to the sound of her chickens squawking in panic and her horses whinnying in fear. Through the rain-lashed darkness, she could see shapes moving near her barn, wolves, drawn by the scent of terrified livestock. She grabbed her rifle and headed for the door, but before she could step outside, a figure emerged from the storm. Crow, soaked to the skin, was already moving between the wolves and her animals with calm efficiency. He didn't shoot, gunshots would only attract more predators. Instead, he used his voice and his presence, gradually driving the pack back into the wilderness. When the last wolf disappeared into the darkness, Sarah found herself standing on her porch in her nightgown, watching him secure her barn door. He looked up and saw her there, illuminated by the lamp she held. Animals are safe, he called over the thunder. Storms spooked them, but they'll settle now. Thank you, she replied, meaning it. He touched his hat brim and started back toward his camp, but Sarah's voice stopped him. Mr. Morrison. Turned. There's coffee on the stove. And biscuits from this morning. It was the first invitation she'd extended in 3 years. Crow's clothes were soaked, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, but his eyes were warm with gratitude. That's kind of you, Mrs. Coleman. But I wouldn't want to impose. You're not imposing, Sarah said quietly. You're helping. Inside her kitchen, Crow sat carefully on the edge of a chair, mindful of his wet clothes. Sarah poured coffee and set out a plate of biscuits, noting how he waited for her permission before taking one. His manners were impeccable, his conversation respectful and minimal. He didn't try to charm her or press his case. He simply existed in her space without threat or demand. Tell me about him, Sarah said suddenly. About Michael at the end. Crow's hand stilled on his coffee cup. What would you like to know? Did he suffer? No, Crow lied gently, remembering the fever and the pain. It was quick. He spoke of you and smiled. That's how he went. Sarah nodded, tears threatening again. He used to say that if anything happened to him, he hoped I'd find someone who would make me laugh the way he did. Someone who would dance with me in the kitchen when no one was watching. He sounds like a good man. The best. Sarah looked up at Crow, studying his weathered face in the lamplight. Why would a man like that trust someone like you with his most precious treasure? Crow considered the question seriously. Because he knew I understood what it meant to lose everything. My parents died when I was 15. Fever took them both in the same week. Michael found me trying to work their farm alone, half-starved and stubborn as a mule. He could have let me fail, but instead he convinced his family to take me in. Sarah's expression softened. He saved you. More than once. That's why I couldn't refuse his dying wish, even though... Crow paused, choosing his words carefully. Even though marrying his widow seemed like the cruelest kindness anyone ever asked of me. Cruel to whom? To you. Being asked to accept a stranger in place of the man you loved. And cruel to me, knowing I'd never measure up to his memory. The honesty in his voice made Sarah's chest tighten. You're not trying to replace him, are you? No, I couldn't if I tried. I'm just trying to honor his faith in me by taking care of what mattered most to him. Crow stood, setting down his empty cup. Thank you for the coffee. And for letting me help tonight. As he reached the door, Sarah called out softly, James? He turned back. You can take your meals here. If you'd like. It gets lonely eating alone. Crow's smile was gentle and grateful. I'd like that very much, Mrs. Coleman. Outside, the storm was passing, leaving the air clean and bright with possibility. The morning sun streamed through Sarah's kitchen windows as she packed a basket with fresh bread, preserves, and wildflowers. Her auburn hair was pinned back neatly, and she wore a simple blue dress, the first colored dress she'd worn since receiving news of Michael's death. James sat at her kitchen table, carefully cleaning his rifle while she worked. Their morning routine had evolved naturally over the months, coffee together at dawn, him heading out to tend her expanding livestock, her managing the thriving garden that now supplied half the valley with vegetables and herbs. Mrs. Patterson's baby is due any day now, Sarah said, adjusting the flowers in her basket. I thought I'd check on her this afternoon. Take the wagon, James replied without looking up from his gun. Road's been washed out in places from last week's rain. It was a typical exchange, practical, caring, comfortable. They developed an easy partnership over 2 years of shared meals and mutual respect. James had never pressed for more than friendship, and Sarah had slowly learned to trust his steady presence in her life. But lately, something had been shifting. Sarah found herself watching him work, noticing the way sunlight caught the silver threading through his dark hair, the gentle competence of his hands, the quiet strength that never needed to prove itself. When he laughed at something old Pete said, she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. When he was away in town for supplies, the cabin felt too quiet. She was falling in love with James Morrison, and it terrified her. Sarah, James said suddenly, making her jump. She'd been staring at him, lost in thought. You all right? Fine, she said quickly, flustered. Just thinking about Mrs. Patterson. But James knew her too well now. He set down his rifle and studied her with those warm brown eyes that missed nothing. You've been quiet lately. Something troubling you? Sarah turned back to her basket, unable to meet his gaze. It's nothing. Just the changing seasons, I suppose. The lies sat heavy between them. In truth, Sarah had been struggling with feelings that seemed like a betrayal of Michael's memory. How could she love another man when her husband's sacrifice had brought them together? How could she dishonor the pure love she'd shared with Michael by accepting something less perfect with James? Sarah. James's voice was gentle but insistent. Talk to me. She spun around, words spilling out before she could stop them. Do you ever think about it? About what would have happened if Michael had lived? If you'd never made that promise? James went very still. Every day. And I think Michael knew exactly what he was doing. James rose from his chair, crossing to where she stood by the window. He wasn't just asking me to marry you, Sarah. He was giving us both a chance at something we'd never have found on our own. But I loved him, Sarah whispered, as if confessing a sin. I know you did. I can see it in every letter you wrote, every story you've told me about him. That kind of love doesn't just disappear. James reached out, gently taking her hands. But loving Michael doesn't mean you can't love again. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. It feels like betrayal. Does it? Or does it feel like coming alive again? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Sarah looked down at their joined hands, his calloused from honest work, hers stained with soil from her garden. Two people who'd found unexpected partnership in duty, friendship in solitude, and now something deeper growing in the space between what was and what could be. I don't know how to do this, Sarah admitted. I don't know how to love someone new without losing what I had before. You don't have to lose anything, James said softly. Michael will always be part of who you are. But Sarah, you're 25 years old. You have a lifetime ahead of you. Don't spend it mourning what's gone when you could be building something new. Before she could lose her nerve, Sarah rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was soft, tentative, nothing like the passionate kisses she'd shared with Michael in their youth. This was different, warmer, deeper, built on 2 years of trust and understanding and genuine affection. When they parted, James rested his forehead against hers. Are you sure? No, Sarah laughed shakily. But I'm tired of being afraid. And I think Michael would want us to be happy. I love you, James said simply. Not because he asked me to, not out of duty or obligation. I love you because you're brave and kind and strong, because you make me want to be better than I am. Sarah's smile was radiant through her tears. I love you too. It's different from what I had with Michael, but it's real. And it's ours. Outside, old Pete was chopping wood, humming an old hymn. The mountains stood eternal and beautiful in the distance. And in Sarah Coleman's kitchen, two hearts that had found each other through grief discovered they were strong enough to choose joy. So, James said, his voice rough with emotion. Will you marry me? Not because a dying man asked you to, but because you want to build a life together. Sarah's answer was another kiss, deeper this time, full of promise and possibility and the courage to love again. The church in Silver Creek was small and simple, filled with wildflowers from Sarah's garden and the warm buzz of friends and neighbors gathering for a wedding. Unlike her first marriage, a grand affair with lace and silk and all the trappings young love demands, this ceremony was quiet, meaningful, built on foundations solid as bedrock. Sarah stood before the mirror in the church's tiny side room, adjusting the blue ribbon in her auburn hair. She wore a simple cream-colored dress she'd sewn herself, practical yet elegant, perfect for the woman she'd become. In her hands she held Michael's watch, its silver surface warm from her touch. You look beautiful, old Pete said from the doorway, resplendent in his one good suit. He'd agreed to walk her down the aisle, the closest thing to family she had left. Michael would be proud. Sarah smiled, tucking the watch into her small bouquet of mountain laurel and wild roses. I hope so. I'm carrying him with me, you know. Not as a burden, but as a blessing. That's the right way of it, Pete agreed. Love ain't something you use up. It's something that grows when you share it. In the main chapel, James waited at the altar beside Reverend Thompson. He wore his best black suit, his usually unruly hair neatly combed, but his hands were steady and his eyes calm. Beside him stood Tom Bradley, his foreman, serving as best man. The small congregation included Mrs. Patterson with her new baby, several ranch families, and the women from Sarah's sewing circle, a community that had grown to know and respect both bride and groom. When the music began, Mrs. Murphy playing the old pump organ with more enthusiasm than skill, Sarah walked down the short aisle with quiet dignity. But when she reached James and saw the love shining in his brown eyes, her composed facade cracked into a radiant smile. Dearly beloved, Reverend Thompson began, we are gathered here today to witness the marriage of James Morrison and Sarah Coleman, two souls who have found in each other the courage to love again. The vows they'd written themselves were simple and honest. James, Sarah said, her voice clear and strong, I promise to be your partner in all things, to trust you with my heart, and to build with you something worthy of the love that brought us together. Sarah, James replied, I promise to honor not just you, but the memory that led us to each other. I promise to love you for who you are, not who you were, and to choose you every day for the rest of my life. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was tender and sure, witnessed by a community that had watched them grow from strangers bound by obligation into partners bound by choice. 3 months later, the little cabin had grown into a proper ranch house, with an addition James had built for the children they hoped to have. Sarah's garden sprawled in neat rows behind the house, providing vegetables for their table and herbs for the medicines she prepared for neighbors. Her sewing circle had evolved into something more, a network of women supporting each other through the challenges of frontier life. On a crisp autumn evening, Sarah and James sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Sarah wore her practical work clothes, the button-up shirt and denim trousers with brown suspenders that had become her signature. Her hair was loosely pinned, a few curls escaping to frame her face, and her gray eyes reflected deep contentment. James, she said softly, her hand resting on the small swell of her belly that announced their first child was on the way. Do you think we've honored his memory? Do you think Michael would approve of what we've built? James covered her hand with his, feeling the life growing beneath their joined palms. I think Michael knew us better than we knew ourselves. He saw that you needed someone who would respect your strength, and I needed someone who would teach me that love doesn't always come easy, but it's worth the wait. Sarah leaned against his shoulder, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. I used to think love was supposed to be desperate and all-consuming, the way it was with Michael when we were young. But this, what we have, it's different. Quieter. Steadier. Better. James asked. Sarah considered this, thinking of the girl who had loved Michael with the fierce passion of youth, and the woman who had chosen James with the wisdom of experience. Not better. Just right for who we are now. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and another answered. The sound drifted across the valley like a promise, wild and free and enduring. Michael's last gift to us, Sarah murmured, wasn't just bringing us together. It was showing us that love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms. It becomes something new and beautiful if we have the courage to let it. James kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair and the mountain air. Then we've honored his promise, he said. All of it. The part about marrying you and the part about making you happy. As the stars grew brighter and the night settled around them, Sarah placed her hand over James's on her belly, feeling their child move beneath their touch. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a ranch to run, neighbors to help, a family to raise in this wild, beautiful country. But tonight, sitting on the porch of the home they'd built together, Sarah Coleman Morrison knew she was exactly where she belonged. The promise made in a dying soldier's last breath had become something neither Michael nor James nor Sarah could have imagined. A love story written not in passion's fire, but in trust's steady glow, as enduring as the mountains and as hopeful as the morning light.